Right. Now, I've got about 30 minutes to speak about the future, which is a fairly large subject. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to talk really fast, get over it. The future, I think, is probably quite accelerated. I'm also going to narrow it down a bit. I'm going to talk, as Andy said, about 5 forces. I think in the program it said demographics and technology. I've lobbed a few others in there. You'll see that there is a 6th one there lurking in the shadows, which is anxiety. I think that's why we've all got these stress balls in our goodie bags. And I think it's caused by the other 5. I think we're exposed to too much stuff nowadays. Demographics is really interesting. I mean, seriously. I mean, it sounds so dull, but it's actually rather interesting. It's the only part of the future, I think, that has numbers attached to it. If you want to know how many people will be aged 80 in Europe in 20 years' time, they're already here to some extent. 7 billion people, massive implications, and it's growing very, very fast. It's where they are and their incomes and what they're doing, particularly what they're consuming, that counts. I think massive implications in terms of resources, particularly energy, water, food, massive implications in terms of infrastructure. It's predominantly an urban population these days, which is quite interesting. Within demographics, the most important thing is aging. Of all of the people that have ever reached the age of 65 throughout human history, half of them woke up this morning. And that's going to change the world, I think, quite significantly. You're also, the longer you live, you're going to need more money. We used to have insurance in case you died. I think increasingly we're having insurance in case you don't. Sort of the younger generation, they're either asleep or they're online. There was a great letter in the Sydney Morning Herald not so long ago about a mother complaining that her 6-year-old had asked whether bread should be put in a toaster, landscape or portrait. I mentioned this to my 9-year-old and he just said, but why didn't the kid just Google it, Dad? The other thing is obviously to do with communications and technology. I mean, anyone under the age of 21 doesn't email. They probably don't wear a watch either because they've got a phone. Why would you? And very short attention spans, nano attention spans. To some extent, all that's going on, particularly with China is reverting to its historical position. I mean, it's the biggest, most powerful, most culturally significant nation on Earth for what, 36, 37, 38 out of the past 40 centuries? I mean, you can argue with that, but I think that's sort of broadly true. Africa, though, I think is the one to watch. And it's not talked about enough. Africa has 2 things that I think are going to be in huge demand in the future. It has natural resources and it has young people. So it's manufacturing, it's call centers. There's also, an emerging domestic market. And we could even get into the rather ironic situation where Africa in 20 or 30 years' time is feeding the rest of the world rather than the other way around. The US is actually far more resilient than people give it credit for. I mean, even if it is the second biggest economy in sort of 8, 10, 12 years, it's still enormous. They're the only OECD country that's going to grow the size of their working population over the next 20, 30 years. They're very open to immigration. They've got the whole American dream, Silicon Valley thing going on. So I think the US is strong. The US is a bit of a buy. China has some issues. I mean, it has lots of issues. They've got an imbalance of young men in the population due to one-child policy and a preference for male children. If the US falls over tomorrow or Europe falls over tomorrow and they're still export-orientated, you could have an awful lot of rather angry young men on the streets. You have sort of Tiananmen Square, but this time we have social media as well, and things could get extremely interesting indeed. So I think just sort of watch that one, really. Connectivity, quickly, or maybe we should say constant connectivity or ubiquitous connectivity. And this links to globalization as well, because global connectivity isn't just the internet and mobile phones. I'm talking about globalization, migration, low-cost travel, all that kind of stuff. Mobile's becoming the critical platform. A few of the other things we're sort of challenging because of this connectivity. I mean, to some extent, dematerialization. I mean, if something can be digitalized, it's moving in that direction. There is potentially a shift from ownership to access or collaborative consumption. If I live in London, I really need a car, but I don't need it all the time, and it's sitting in the street costing me a fortune. What I really want is access to a car. I want fractional ownership of a car, and something like Zipcar allows me to do that. I find it with my phone, I open it up, I can drop it anywhere, the company knows where it is because of connectivity devices in it. I could even pay for it with my phone and so on. Green technologies. This is the stuff that everyone is kind of expecting me to talk about. So this is genetics, robotics, internet, and nanotechnology. And I think they are about to change the world in ways that we can scarcely imagine. I mean, genetics, for example, is moving at a faster pace than computing. I mean, most of you have heard of Moore's law in computing. Genetics is moving way faster than that. Having said that, a lot of the basics haven't changed in thousands of years, and we shouldn't forget that. And there is opportunity in digging into the basics. I mean, media, for example, has changed phenomenally on the surface, but the reason that people consume media, I would suggest, has barely changed at all. The internet, don't assume it's going to be like it is now in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. I mean, first of all, we might move away from it for various reasons. I think it's likely to be far more immersive. Where the younger generation might be onto something here, funnily enough, is I'm not sure, well, there's going to be less distinction between what's real and what's virtual. Everything is to some extent going to dissolve into data. Everything has a sort of mirror image that's digital, anything that's significant anyway. And, you know, you think I'm nuts, but I'm talking about my suit, my shoes. You can only buy shoes with computers in. That was 5 years ago. I suppose the big question for me with all of this technology stuff is machines are undoubtedly going to get a lot smarter, but I think it's conceivable that we're going to get more stupid, certainly in certain areas. And digital technology in particular is enabling certain types of thinking, but it's corroding other types, which worries me somewhat. The environment, I haven't got time to get stuck into this, but you know, there's two views on climate change. One view is it's the end of the world, the other view is it isn't. The pessimistic view is around you cannot have endless growth on a finite planet. I mean, it's a plausible argument. The other sort of more optimistic view is, yeah, but we invent stuff. We're real good at that. Our brains haven't changed very much in thousands and thousands of years. The environment they operate in has. The reason we get the future so very, very wrong is a couple of things. First of all, the brain is very lazy or very energy efficient. It likes stuff it's familiar with, stuff it's seen before. You know, we've got pathways in our brains and filing cabinets that it loves sending stuff down because unfamiliar stuff, it needs new routes to be built, it needs new filing cabinets. So we tend to extrapolate now into the future, which favors the status quo. That's our sort of natural tendency, and the brain loves doing that. The other thing about the brain is what's called confirmation bias, which you might have heard of. Once we have a view, or an opinion on something, anything, our subconscious tends to seek out information that supports that view and actually filters out stuff that challenges that view. So that's another reason that we can get the future so fantastically wrong. And what I quite like about scenario planning is it openly acknowledges multiple futures. I mean, the management writer Peter Drucker said that the only thing we know about the future is that it's going to be different. I would add that the only thing we know with any certainty about the future is that it's uncertain. Now, this is picking up on an earlier point, if the future is uncertain, logically there must be more than one of them. There must be all sorts of different ways the future could turn out. I think that's absolutely true. So I like scenarios as a framework for dealing with multiple futures. They acknowledge ambiguity. You know, it brings disagreement to the surface. I think fundamentally we have three options. The first option is that we just ignore the future and see what happens. Good luck with that one. The second one is we set aside time to really think out what might happen. You know, what are the possibilities and how would we react if certain things happened? And this is being done up to a point at the moment. You know, what happens if Greece pulls out of the euro? What if Europe completely collapses and so on and so forth? But I think there's a third option. Go back to the five forces and the sixth one lurking in the shadows, which was anxiety. I think the real reason there is so much anxiety around at the moment is that we really have no idea where we're going. We can't see the path ahead. And I think that's essentially a failure of leadership. You know, leaders are supposed to lead. They're supposed to have a view of where they're heading for, and they're not really doing that at the moment. You cannot predict the future, not in any meaningful sense. Yes, you can see patterns, but fundamentally you cannot predict it. But I think you can build it. And I think that's what you, me, and we need to do right now. Thank you very much.